حي على الفلاح.
Look at how the Prophet ﷺ would engage with his companions in lifting up their spirits, but also as a reflection of his humility, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Once he was coming back from one journey, and at the end of the journey, at the end was the companion Jabir bin Abdullah radiallahu anhu. And Jabir was a young man, and he was struggling to catch up with the rest of them. Even though he was very young, but he couldn't catch up. And so the Prophet ﷺ left the front, and then he rode back to the end where Jabir was. And he said to Jabir, "What is up with you? Why is it that you can't catch up with us?" And Jabir says, "You see, it's my camel, Ya Rasulullah. My camel is so incapable of going forth with speed." And the Prophet says to him, "Nawilni hadil asa, give this staff to me." And Jabir gave him the staff, and the Prophet took the staff and just tapped against the camel, and the camel suddenly woke up and came to life and began to sprint ahead. And Sahaba are amazed, and they said, "How did that happen? What happened?" And Jabir says, "Asabatu baraka, asabatu baraka." Blessing has come upon the camel. And the Prophet was happy. And then later on in the day, the Prophet ﷺ, he met up with Jabir on the journey back to Medina. And he said to Jabir, how did you find the camel? How did you find the camel? And Jabir said, "It's wonderful, Ya Rasulullah. It's wonderful. Thank you. It's great." And the Prophet says to him, "Why wouldn't you sell it to me, O Jabir?" And Jabir is thinking in his head, why on earth would I sell the camel for? If he had asked me maybe 10 minutes ago when it wasn't moving, then maybe. He's thinking in his brain, why would I want to sell the camel? But he's saying, "Ya Rasulullah, no, Ya Rasulullah, just take it. And the Prophet is saying, "No, sell it to me. And Jabir is saying, "No, Ya Rasulullah." And then at the end, Jabir says, "Okay, how much would you like to take for it?" And the Prophet says, "Bi'nihi bidirham. Sell it to me for 1 dirham." And Jabir is so perplexed, and he's thinking, "What? Obviously it's worth more than 1 dirham." But he can't say that, But then he does. He said, "Ya Rasulullah, this camel, it's worth more." He says it, And the Prophet said, "Okay, then bidirhamain, then sell it to me for 2 dirhams." And Jabir still is perplexed, and he said, "No, Ya Rasulullah, come on, it's worth much more than 2 dirhams, And it goes up and up and up until it reaches half an ounce of gold. And Jabir remembers he has a debt to pay of that much amount of money, and so he agrees and he says, "Ya Rasulullah, that's yours." The Prophet said, "That's fine." And then but Jabir says, "But let me ride it back at least to Medina, and then tomorrow I will exchange hands and I'll give the camel to you." And so when Jabir is reaching Medina, he begins to speed up on his camel. And the Prophet ﷺ, he said to Jabir, "What is the hurry? What's the haste in getting back?" And Jabir says, "Ya Rasulullah, I'm newlywed. I'm just been married. I have obviously an eagerness to get back to my wife in Medina." And the Prophet says, "Who did you marry, Jabir? Did you marry a young girl or an older woman?" And Jabir says, "No, you see, Ya Rasulullah, what happened is that my mother died. And I have 3 sisters. And so I had to make a choice, a decision based upon my domestic circumstances. I wanted to marry somebody who is old enough to tend and look after my sisters. And so I married an older woman." And the Prophet was so moved by his narrating of that life experience and story. He was so moved. And Jabir says that my riding back to Medina, I heard the Prophet ﷺ say more than 25 times behind me, "Allahumma ighfir li Jabir, Allahumma ighfir." "Oh Allah, forgive Jabir. Oh Allah, forgive Jabir." Meaning sending prayers upon him. He said more than 25 times. Jabir then gets back to Medina and he tells his wife the whole saga, the whole tale of what happened. But Jabir still is feeling as if he needed that camel. And his wife said, no, it's not your business now. Nabi Sallallahu is Nabi Sallallahu, why would you have a problem? And so then he feels satisfied and he goes the next morning, he goes out with his camel to find the Prophet Sallallahu, and he sees Bilal radiallahu anhu. And so Bilal has a pouch with the money and he hands it over to Jabir. Jabir, in looking at the money, he sees that is the half an ounce of gold worth, and there is ziyada, there is a surplus, there's extra money. And so Jabir is quite perplexed and confused, and he's saying, well, it's great that there is extra money now for me. I can maybe sell the camel and buy another camel. And so he says, and then he went and found the Prophet himself, and the Prophet smiled at him, and Jabir said to him, Jazakallahu khairan for the money and for the extra surplus money you gave. And the Prophet says to Jabir, where is the camel? And Jabir says, the camel is right over there, Ya Rasulullah. And the Prophet smiled at him and said to him, I was never gonna buy your camel in the first place. I was never gonna deprive you of your camel. I only wanted to spend 5 minutes of my time with you, because I could see that you were struggling in life, struggling on your journey, and I wanted just to spend 5 minutes, raising your hopes and your wishes up. And Jabir was so taken aback by that response that in the narration it says that he left Medina screaming. And a non-Muslim passed him by and asked, what has happened? And he said, I want to introduce you to my Prophet. And I swear by Allah that he is the best human being who has ever lived. وَعِبَادُ الرَّحْمَنِ, and the servants of Rahman are those who walk on the earth with hawna, with a sense of softness and peace. And when the ignorant ones address them, they say salam. وَالَّذِينَ يَبِيتُونَ لِرَبِّهِمْ سُجَّدًا وَقِيَامًا, and those who spend part of their night in worship, in prostrating to Allah and in standing before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As a final thing, we want to try and get to a state as believers where our active and passive responses are similar. Allah in the Qur'an, He speaks about those إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ الَّذِينَ إِذَا ذُكِرَ اللَّهُ وَجِلَتْ قُلُوبُهُم. Those are indeed إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ. There's tawqeed, emphasis here. Allah says the believers are truly those الَّذِينَ إِذَا ذُكِرَ اللَّهُ, those who when they're reminded of Allah. It doesn't even say those who when they remember Allah. That's different. But when they're reminded of Allah, وَجِلَتْ قُلُوبُهُم, their hearts tremble. When they're reminded of Allah, their hearts tremble. وَإِذَا تُلِيَتْ عَلَيْهِمْ آيَاتُهُ, and when the verses of Allah are recited upon them, زَادَتْهُمْ إِيمَانًا, their iman increases. وَعَلَى رَبِّهِمْ يَتَوَكَّلُونَ, and upon their Lord they place their trust.